The sun had just begun its slow descent behind the sycamore trees, stretching shadows across the ivy-lined fence I'd spent most of the afternoon trimming. I still had my straw hat on, and my gloves were smudged with mulch when I heard the soft thump at the mailbox. Usually it was just utility bills or offers from local garden centers, but this envelope was thick, formal, the kind of paper that felt expensive even before touching it. My name, Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, was typed in small, tight letters that immediately brought back the kind of correspondence that had changed my life once before. I carried it into the kitchen, set it beside the clay watering jug, and removed my gloves slowly, deliberately, as if dragging out the time would somehow delay what I already sensed. Still, I unfolded the letter carefully, smoothing the heavy crease down the center with my palm. Please do not attend the upcoming Grayson family reunion. It's best we part ways for now. No dear Mom, no warmth, just the cold echo of my son's name at the bottom. Victor. I stood frozen. Even the whir of the refrigerator seemed to pause, and the air in the room grew heavier. I read it twice, then again. I pressed my hand to the page, willing the ink to shift, but it never did. A breeze lifted the corner of the letter through the screen door, and I flattened it back down like I could silence it. My hand hovered over my phone for a moment, thumb poised over the keyboard. I typed, understood. No punctuation, no begging. I hit send. Outside, the garden hose was still half looped across the lawn, forgotten, dribbling water into the gravel. I sat down at the table and stared at the letter one more time, then folded it with surgical care and tucked it back into the envelope. I had given him everything. Now I knew how little that meant. By dawn, my mind was already unraveling the details of the trust. When Victor turned 6, we buried his father. I'll never forget the way he clung to my hand at the cemetery in his slightly too big blazer, trying to hold in tears because I was weeping too hard to comfort him. I told him we'd be all right, even though I had no idea what came next. We sold the house within a month, the home Henry and I had bought as newlyweds, with the ivy-covered porch and the wisteria that bloomed every May. Too many ghosts. We moved to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment near the rail tracks, where trains woke us at night and the walls carried our neighbors' lives into ours. But it was ours. I worked mornings as a clerk at the community college and cleaned offices at night. On weekends, I stocked shelves at a pharmacy. Summers, I ran tutoring sessions at the local church and sold baked goods at the flea market. The doctoral program I'd once cherished became a dream deferred. One term off turned into another until the official notice came. Victor found that envelope, too, and asked me if I was ever going back. Someday, I told him with a smile. He was gifted, always had been. Took apart broken electronics just to understand how they ticked. Won science competitions using borrowed equipment and ideas he scribbled on scrap paper. When he got a half scholarship to Columbia, I cried harder than I did the day we buried his father. I made up the rest of the tuition with grants and credit cards. I even took out a private loan under my name. He promised me he'd make it worth it. After graduation, he came home with ideas and ambition. He talked about disruption, innovation, market gaps. He pitched me a startup plan late one night over frozen pizza, and I listened. I always listened. He needed a co-signer. I said yes. When the bank hesitated, I tapped into my retirement account. Just until we secure angel funding, he said. You'll see, Mom, I'll change your life. The day he called me to say it had launched, Pulse Point, it was just after I'd gotten back from the market, my arms full of groceries. It's official, he said, breathless. You're gonna be proud. I told him I already was. Years passed. The calls became less about sharing and more about asking. Could I sign a lease? Could I extend credit for short-term expenses? Only you, Mom, you're the only one I can trust. Then he met Elise. They married in a vineyard in Northern California. I paid my own way, stayed in a roadside motel, and hour away and sat in the third row while Elise's family filled the first two. No one asked me to join the photos. I didn't offer. Still, I sent cards every birthday. I wired money discreetly when payroll needed smoothing, and I kept saying yes even when I should have stopped. I told myself that someday he'd remember. Yesterday, when I opened that letter, I realized he already had remembered, just not the parts I thought mattered. That morning, I dug through the drawer where I kept the trust paperwork. It was a folder I hadn't touched in years. Victor never knew it existed until I told him. When his company started gaining traction, I revealed it, a trust fund of nearly $1.3 million from the sale of Henry's properties. It was always meant for Victor, for his future, for his family. He called me generous, said he was touched. I called it love. I didn't think about the trust again until that morning. Then, 2 days later, I saw it. On my niece's Clara's Instagram, a stack of navy blue invitations, gold foiled, thick as wedding cards. She boomeranged one. The caption said, "Counting down to the Grayson family reunion, Napa bound." My hands tightened around my phone. I hadn't gotten one, not even a group email, not a text. I read the comments. Elise dropped a row of hearts. Someone from her side wrote, "Looks like a 5-star weekend ahead." Another, "The Graysons know how to build legacy." Legacy? I closed the app and stared out the window. That afternoon, I checked the mailbox. Just junk mail, a coupon for windshield repair, a real estate flyer. I even looked under the mat, near the door like maybe it had slipped through and gotten stuck. Nothing. That night, I called Clara. Didn't mention it at first, just made small talk. I asked about her semester. She told me about a new podcast she liked. Then casually, "Isn't the reunion going to be amazing? Elise hired a PR firm to get it into Legacy Lineage magazine." Then, with sugar-laced confusion, "You and Uncle Victor are coming together, right?" I said, "I don't think I'm invited." Silence. Then, "Oh, I'm sure it was just an oversight." But it wasn't. 2 days later, Victor called. I was sipping tea on the porch with my neighbor Lorraine. The call came in loud on speaker. "I just don't think it's wise to include her. She's not really part of the image we're trying to curate. Elisa's parents worked with the Bradleys on the guest list, and, well, optics matter." Lorraine shot me a look. I didn't react. I just stared at the marigolds. "It's not personal," he added. "Sometimes you have to refine your narrative." I ended the call before he finished. Lorraine didn't say anything, just reached over and squeezed my hand. The next morning, I called Thomas. He was still in the same building where Henry and I had first signed our will. Old brass handles, wood-paneled walls, and the smell of lemon polish. He opened the door, looked at me like he'd been expecting this. "Eleanor," he said gently. I placed Victor's letter on his desk without a word. He read it, jaw tight. "You're sure?" I nodded. I was more than sure. We spent the next hour reviewing the trust. I told him I wanted Victor removed. He asked if I had a new beneficiary. I did. I passed him a folded paper with the name Mila Dawson, 20 years old, my goddaughter, works the early shift at the supermarket, raising her younger brother after their mother left them. Got into Georgia Tech but deferred because there was no one else to help at home. She never asked me for a thing. She just showed up when I was sick, brought soup, offered to drive me to appointments, called me ma'am even when I asked her not to. When I told her she had grit, she cried. Thomas nodded. I signed the papers without shaking. Each stroke of my name was calm and final, like stitching a seam closed. It was done. Victor would be notified by the end of the day. I picked up my purse, thanked Thomas, and walked back into the sunlight. I wasn't furious. I wasn't devastated. I was clean, whole in a way I hadn't been in years. That evening, I roasted salmon and turned off my phone. The next day, it started ringing. I let it. The first call came at 8:12 a.m. Victor, then again at 8:17, and once more at 8:22. I didn't answer. I was in the garden, pruning the azaleas. The sun was warm, but not unbearable, and I was humming something without realizing it. By 9:30, I had 12 missed calls. Elise tried once, then twice, then gave up. By noon, the number was at 29. My neighbor Lorraine peeked over the fence while hanging laundry and raised her eyebrows. "You planning to answer any of those?" she asked. "No," I said, clipping a low-hanging branch. "I don't think I am." The phone buzzed again on the kitchen counter as I walked past it with muddy gloves and a trowel in one hand. When I returned for water, the number had climbed to 47. I set the phone face down, let it vibrate against the tile. I finally played the voicemails around 3 in the afternoon while I stood at the sink, rinsing the dust from a batch of strawberries I'd picked earlier. Victor's voice cracked in the first message. "Mom, what did you do? You can't just change something like that without talking to me. Do you know what this does to our plans?" The second voicemail was Elisa's. Her voice had that carefully curated tone of someone who's used to winning. "This is really disruptive, Eleanor. We're in the middle of negotiations, and this move, this betrayal, puts everything at risk. You're hurting all of us." The third message came from a man I'd never met. "Mrs. Grayson, this is Russell Tate. I'm representing several of Pulse Point's early stakeholders. We'd appreciate a conversation regarding your recent actions. It's in everyone's best interest." I deleted each message after listening. No response, no reply, just deletion. I turned the phone off completely and placed it back in the drawer. That evening, I sat out on the porch with a cold glass of iced tea. Lorraine joined me and handed over a small plate of lemon cookies. "You're calmer than I'd be," she said. "Takes practice," I replied. The sky faded slowly, the colors dissolving into soft grays and blues. I didn't turn the phone back on. I didn't need to. The next morning, a courier arrived with a yellow envelope. Legal notice. Official sounding language. Victor's legal team requesting reversal of the trust reassignment. Immediate action required. Potential consequences outlined in vague but threatening terms. I didn't even open it. I placed it beside the napkin holder and went outside to fertilize the blueberry bushes. The soil was dry and resistant, but I worked it slowly, kneeling with gloves and a small rake. The ache in my knees reminded me I was still strong enough to tend to something. That pain was honest. That pain came from care, not from regret. Lorraine came by later with a pitcher of sweet tea. "You still trying?" she asked, handing me a glass. "They'll run out of energy before I do," I said. She smiled and tapped her glass to mine. "You're steel, Eleanor." That night, I didn't sleep much. The silence in the house pressed in harder than usual. I made myself a cup of herbal tea around midnight and walked barefoot to the porch, letting the breeze move over me. I felt calm. More than that, I felt right. The next morning, Victor showed up unannounced. He knocked, no, pounded on the door like someone with authority. When I opened it, he was standing there in a crisp blazer and dress shoes, looking completely out of place in the humid Carolina air. His face was flushed, his jaw tight. "What the hell is going on?" he snapped. I didn't say anything. I simply stepped aside and let him in, not because I owed him that courtesy, but because I didn't want the neighbors to hear what I knew was coming. He walked in like he still owned the space, like it had remained frozen since the last time he'd visited, even though it had been years. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where I once packed his lunch, helped him with math homework, listened to his stories about robots and rockets. Now, he didn't smile, he didn't ask how I'd been, he just dove in. "You had no right to change the trust without notifying me." I met his gaze evenly. "I had every right. You blindsided me. Elise's family is furious. We're in the middle of a funding round. Do you know how this looks? It's instability, Mom. It spooks investors." I rested my hands in my lap. "You didn't send me an invitation." He blinked, momentarily thrown off. "What?" "To the reunion. You didn't invite me." That wasn't intentional. That must have been an oversight." Was I invited? I asked calmly. His mouth opened, then closed again. The silence that followed was louder than any yelling could have been. That's what I thought, I said. He leaned forward, urgency creeping into his posture. We can still fix this. Damage control is what we do. We say there was a misunderstanding. We'll frame it as a health scare, something sympathetic. We'll reinstate the trust and move on. Clean. It's not about cleaning up a mess, I said. It's about acknowledging the one you've made over the last decade. You're blowing this out of proportion. You erased me. You used me over and over. And then when I didn't suit the image you wanted, you cut me out. Now that I've finally drawn a line, you're scrambling to undo it because it affects you financially. Not emotionally, not personally, just money. That's not fair, he said. Neither was asking me to co-sign 3 loans and then treating me like a footnote in your life. He was silent, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. Calculations, strategies, damage control. When he stood, he didn't apologize, he didn't plead, he just said, "We'll see what the legal team says." Then he walked out. I didn't follow. I didn't shut the door until I heard his car pull away from the curb. The legal envelope still sat unopened on the table. I left it there. That evening, Thomas called. His voice was softer than usual. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. I didn't want you hearing it from anyone else." I sat down slowly. 3 weeks ago, Victor submitted documentation attempting to leverage the trust as collateral for a private loan. He listed himself as the authorized manager, which, legally, he wasn't. My breath caught. "He didn't tell me." "He was counting on your silence," Thomas said gently. "The trust's terms required your consent for any transaction. He bypassed it, banking on you not noticing. But when we filed the amendment, that halted everything." I closed my eyes. What was the loan for? A shell investment group out of Nevada. High risk, no transparency. My good says it's a way to shuffle unstable assets off Pulse Point's books before their next round of fundraising. So if I hadn't acted, you could have been legally and financially liable, Thomas finished. You did the right thing. You protected yourself. I thanked him, though the word felt small. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark. The sound of the refrigerator filled the room. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't broken. It was resolved. Victor hadn't just forgotten me. He had gambled with me. Counted on my silence. Counted on my love. I went to the drawer, pulled out the legal envelope, and ripped it clean in half. Then I went to bed. Not angry, not bitter, just done. Monday came quietly, but the air felt different. I woke with a kind of clarity that settled over me like fresh linen sheets. I made oatmeal, folded laundry, and waited. Around 11, a message lit up on my old desktop computer, the one I used to write community newsletters and track my utility bills. It was from Mila. Just a simple line. "Is today okay?" I wrote back, "I'll be there at 2. We met at First Carolina Bank, the same place Henry and I had opened our joint account when we got married. Mila was already waiting outside when I pulled into the parking lot, wearing her familiar faded green hoodie and jeans, her long curls tied back in a messy knot. She looked like a girl who didn't quite know how to carry something good. Her eyes darted nervously from the marble walls to the clean, echoing tile floors. I smiled and walked with her toward the teller line. "You belong here," I said gently. We sat down with a banker named Carla, who wore red-framed glasses and called us both Hun. I handed over the documents and explained the setup clearly. The trust was now under Mila's name. Funds would be dispersed only for education, housing, and essentials. She wouldn't be able to withdraw large sums without documented need. I told her this wasn't a gift, it was a foundation. Mila listened, nodded, and only spoke when everything was signed. We stood outside under the afternoon sun, and she turned to me, cheeks flushed and lips trembling. "No one's ever done something like this for me," she said. "You earned it," I told her. "I just unlocked the door." That week, I found myself drawn to movement, action. I signed up to volunteer at the neighborhood community center on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The space wasn't fancy, flickering lights, chipped linoleum, old folding chairs, but the people inside were real. I began teaching a financial literacy class for young women, most of them single moms or girls just starting out with little more than hourly jobs and a whole lot of bad advice behind them. I taught them how to read a loan contract, what predatory interest rates looked like, how to set up savings accounts no one else could drain. I brought cookies and made photocopies. I never mentioned Victor. I didn't need to. The second Thursday, one of the girls, Denise, raised her hand after class and said, "You talk like someone who's been taken advantage of." I looked at her and said, "Because I have." They started asking more questions after that. By the end of the month, the class had doubled. That Friday night, after I'd washed the dishes and turned on the porch light, I opened the cedar keepsake box in the hallway closet. It smelled faintly of lavender. Inside was a photo I hadn't touched in years. Victor, age 8, holding a handmade paper trophy that said, "Best Mom Ever," in purple crayon. I ran my thumb along the edge of the frame. I let go to protect myself. I still love you, but I love me now, too. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I closed the box and slid it gently back onto the shelf. The next morning, a courier dropped off another envelope from Victor's legal team. I left it on the kitchen counter, unopened, next to a pile of mailers from the local grocery store. I already knew what it said. Consequences. Legal jargon dressed up like concern. They were never worried about me. They were worried about what it cost them to lose control of me. I went about my day like the letter didn't exist. There was blueberry jam to make and begonias to replant. I watered the garden, pulled weeds from the cracks in the sidewalk, and made a lemon loaf for Lorraine. That evening, I watched the news with the volume low and the windows open. The breeze carried the scent of jasmine and the hum of distant traffic. I felt peace. Real peace. Not the fragile kind that shatters when the phone rings. At dawn the next day, I packed a small suitcase. 3 blouses, 2 pairs of jeans, a comfortable pair of shoes, and the copy of Maya Angelou's Letter to My Daughter I'd never finished. I left a note for Lorraine to water the azaleas and feed the cat. Then I backed out of the driveway and headed toward the mountains. No destination, just motion. The road was quiet, the landscape shifting slowly from marshy lowlands to cool, pine-covered curves. I wasn't running, I was reclaiming. Somewhere near Asheville, I stopped at a gas station diner and ordered coffee. The waitress called me Sugar and brought it hot with a side of kindness. I sat at the corner booth and watched the world drift by. A woman with a toddler and a yellow raincoat, a man helping his father into a car, a couple laughing over a shared milkshake. It struck me then. Life goes on. Whether you're invited or not, whether you're loved loudly or in silence, life continues. I took out my notebook and began writing. Not about pain or betrayal, but about healing. About the parts of myself I was only now starting to rediscover. The part that didn't need validation. The part that found joy in helping a girl like Mila stand tall in a bank lobby. The part that still believed in the goodness of small things. That night, I stayed in a bed and breakfast with creaky floors and floral wallpaper. The owner, a woman named Doris, asked me if I was traveling for business or pleasure. I said, "Neither," with a smile. "I'm just traveling." She nodded, as if she understood completely. After dinner, she gave me a tin of herbal tea and a blanket that smelled like sunshine. I sat by the window and wrote a letter, not to Victor, but to myself. A promise that I would no longer shrink to make others comfortable. that I would no longer fund my own erasure, that I had value not because of what I could give, but because of who I was when I stopped giving it all away. I folded the letter, tucked it into my journal, and fell asleep to the sound of crickets and wind through the trees. In the morning, I didn't rush. I sipped tea on the porch with Doris and let the sun find my face. The phone, still powered off, sat at the bottom of my bag. I didn't miss it. I didn't need it. I was finally living a life that didn't hinge on someone else deciding whether I was enough. I had chosen myself, and I wasn't going back. By the time I returned home 3 days later, the hydrangeas had started to bloom in full, their petals heavy with color like they'd been holding their breath and had finally exhaled. Lorraine had kept everything just as I'd left it. Plants watered, mail stacked neatly in a basket, even a fresh loaf of bread sitting under a towel on the counter. I stepped through the doorways slowly, not because I was uncertain, but because everything felt different. It wasn't the house that had changed. It was me. I moved through each room like I was greeting an old friend, taking stock of what was mine again. In the hallway, I passed the envelope from Victor's attorney, still sitting unopened on the table. I looked at it once, then slid it into a drawer with expired coupons and old takeout menus. That chapter was closed. That afternoon, I got a message from Mila. Just a picture. Her and her little brother sitting at the kitchen table, a used laptop open between them, grinning. No words, just the photo. I smiled so wide it hurt. I didn't need thanks. That look on her face was enough. That same day, I returned to the community center. The class had grown again. This time there were more questions, more backstories whispered in the hallway before we began. One girl, Samira, had been couch surfing with her 3-year-old for weeks. Another, Brandy, had been duped into co-signing a car loan for someone who disappeared with the vehicle. I listened, not like a teacher, but like someone who understood what it meant to be needed only when convenient. I brought in blank budget sheets and taught them how to itemize needs versus wants. I told them the truth about fine print. I showed them the beauty of saying no. After class, Denise came up to me again. "You always look so calm," she said. "Even when you talk about stuff that sounds like it should make you angry." I looked her in the eye. Anger's easy. Stillness takes work. Later that evening, I made a lemon meringue pie. It was a recipe Victor used to love when he was small. He would sit on the counter, licking the whipped peaks off the mixing spoon, eyes bright and laughing. I thought about that boy, how sweet he was, how scared, how tightly he held my hand at his father's funeral. I didn't regret loving him. I didn't even regret helping him. What I regretted was not seeing sooner how far I'd let that love stretch without boundaries. I poured a glass of sweet tea and carried the pie across the yard to Lorraine's house. We sat on her porch and ate in silence for a while. Then she turned to me and said, "You did right, Not just for Mila, for yourself." I nodded. It took me a long time to figure out I was allowed to. The following morning, I got a handwritten letter in the mail. Real ink on real paper. The envelope had a return address in Palo Alto. I knew who it was before I opened it. Victor's handwriting hadn't changed much from high school. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea and unfolded it carefully. It was short. 5 sentences. "Mom, I don't know why you did this. I'm not asking you to change it back, but I think it was cruel. Elise thinks I should cut ties completely. I haven't decided yet. I hope you're proud." I stared at the page for a long moment, then folded it and placed it in the drawer beside the other. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the urge. I had already said goodbye, even if he hadn't heard it. That afternoon, I picked up more notebooks and markers from the dollar store for the center. I ran into Mila outside the post office. She was holding a paper bag of groceries, and her face lit up when she saw me. She said, "I started classes. Online for now, but it's happening." "That's wonderful," I told her. "You'll do more than I ever did." She said, "I'm trying." "And my little brother, he wants to be an engineer." I told him he'd better learn from the best. She hugged me then, tight, real, and full of something I hadn't felt in a long time. purpose. That night, I sat by the window with a pen and notebook. I didn't write to Victor. I wrote to every woman who'd ever told me she felt invisible, every mother who'd poured her soul into someone who forgot to say thank you, every friend who said, "I'm fine," when she was anything but. I wrote for them. And for myself. We are not backup plans. We are not stepping stones. We are not containers for other people's dreams. We are whole, even when we are not chosen. We are enough, even when we are alone. The words poured out like water from a broken dam. I wasn't trying to make art. I was trying to make truth. When I finished, I looked up and saw my reflection in the darkened window. I saw someone older, yes, but also someone stronger. Someone who had finally stopped waiting to be invited into her own life. I whispered, "You came home." Then I turned off the light and let the peace in. The following week moved with a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Morning tea on the porch, my class at the center twice a week, evening walks through the neighborhood with Lorraine where we talked about everything and nothing. There was something sacred about those small rituals. They weren't grand, they didn't make headlines, but they were mine. Each day felt like a quiet reclamation of space I had forgotten to fill with myself. On Thursday, as I was sorting a box of old books to donate, I came across an old planner, one I'd used in the year Victor started college. The pages were full of notations, loan deadlines, grocery lists, tutoring appointments, call reminders. Almost every square was filled with something for him. A list of items for his dorm room, phone numbers for financial aid offices. A sticky note inside the cover read, "Don't forget to ask about work study." I ran my fingers over it and sat down slowly. I remembered that year so vividly. The way I'd scrounged for deals, the hours I'd worked, the way I'd stretch a casserole to last 3 days so I could cover his textbooks. And I remembered how proud I'd been to do it. Not because I expected gratitude, but because it was love. Pure, unfiltered, sacrificial love. But even love, I now understood, must have edges. Must have borders where the self is not erased. I placed the planner back in the box and carried it to the trunk of the car. At the donation center, a young woman thanked me and offered a bright smile. She looked just like Mila might have had she grown up without my help. That afternoon, Lorraine and I visited a new exhibit at the local museum, portraits of women throughout American history. There were no famous faces, just stories. Mothers, farmers, nurses, small-town teachers, women whose names the world didn't know, but whose legacies lived on in quilts, gardens, and children raised with grit. I stood in front of one painting, an elderly woman standing on a porch much like mine, holding a broom in one hand and a casserole dish in the other, and felt something unspoken pass between us. Strength. Unrecognized, but enduring. That evening, back home, I found a voicemail from Victor. Just one. I hadn't turned the phone off in a week, but I'd stopped checking it regularly. His voice sounded different, less polished, less rehearsed. "Mom, I don't know what to say anymore. I keep telling myself this was a misunderstanding, but I don't know if that's true. Elise thinks you're punishing us. I guess I just didn't think it mattered that much to you. The reunion, the photos, the way we've been distant. Maybe I convinced myself you were fine with it. But I know you're not, and I don't know how to fix it. Maybe you don't want it fixed. I don't blame you." There was a long pause before he added, "I loved the lemon meringue pie. Elise made it last week. It wasn't as good as yours." Then the message ended. I didn't cry, but I did replay it once, then I deleted it. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need to hold on to it. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant no longer carrying what had already been dropped. 2 days later, I stood in front of the community center bulletin board and posted a flyer: Financial Empowerment for Women, free workshop series. I'd expanded the class, added topics like long-term planning, how to avoid emotional manipulation through money, and recognizing financial red flags in relationships. I'd also partnered with a local lawyer to host a legal Q&A. By the end of the day, we had 20 new signups. That night, Mila called just to chat. "Do you think I'm being selfish for being happy right now?" she asked softly. "No," I told her. "You're being brave." She paused. "I've been thinking about all the women in my family who gave up everything and never got anything back. I don't want to be one of them." "You won't be, because you know where the line is now, and you're allowed to keep some of yourself." The next morning, I received another letter. This one wasn't from Victor. It was from his lawyer, again. But this one felt different. It wasn't threatening. It was careful, deliberate, and full of half-sentences that circled around one idea. They were willing to negotiate, reinstating partial access, compromises, shared management. I folded it in half without finishing it and slid it into the drawer with the others. Not because I was tempted, but because I wanted to remember how quickly regret turns strategic when consequences finally arrive. I went outside and deadheaded the lilies. The sky was open and blue, and I let the warmth of the sun fill my arms. Lorraine waved from her garden across the way. We didn't need words anymore, just gestures of endurance. That evening, back home, I sat on the porch with a cup of mint tea and opened the small wooden box again. This time, I didn't pull out Victor's photo. I pulled out a blank card and wrote Mila's name on the envelope. Inside, I wrote, "You are the beginning of a new story. Make it one worth retelling." I sealed it and placed it on the hallway table. Tomorrow, I'd give it to her in person. Not with ceremony, just with presence, the kind I used to give so freely and now finally had learned to give with intention. As the porch light flickered on and the breeze whispered through the wisteria, I whispered to myself, this is what healing looks like. Not loud, not final, but certain. Quiet, and absolutely mine. The following Sunday arrived soft and slow, the kind of morning where the light seems to linger a little longer over everything it touches. I brewed my tea, sliced some peaches into a bowl, and sat by the window watching a cardinal hop along the garden fence. My home felt still, but not the kind of stillness that comes from loneliness. This was earned silence, rich and deep. I didn't turn on the TV or check my phone. I didn't feel the tug of waiting for anything or anyone. I had finally reached a place where no apology could define my worth and no absence could empty me. Just before noon, I walked to the community center with the envelope addressed to Mila tucked into my purse. The parking lot was full, a good sign. Inside, the air buzzed with energy. The young women who'd once entered with folded arms and guarded eyes now greeted each other with laughs and questions. Denise waved me over and whispered, "We've got 2 new girls from across town. They heard what we're doing here." I nodded, heart swelling. After class, I found Mila outside near the benches, her little brother at her side, showing her something on a tablet. I handed her the envelope without explanation. "It's not much," I said. She opened it slowly, read the message, and clutched it to her chest with tears in her eyes. "I don't want to disappoint you," she said. "You won't," I told her. "But even if you stumble, you'll be falling forward." I hugged her tightly and felt the future wrap itself around that moment. Later that evening, as the sky turned violet and the scent of grilled suppers drifted through the neighborhood, I took one last walk around the yard. The garden had grown wild in places. I didn't mind. Some things weren't meant to be trimmed back too soon. The mailbox held only flyers and a grocery catalog. No more letters in cold fonts, no more declarations masked as requests. I stood at the edge of the porch, holding the railing, letting the air press gently against my skin. Lorraine called across the lawn, "Coming over later?" I nodded, after I finished watering. We were women who understood each other without many words. Women who had seen how easily kindness could be mistaken for weakness, and how choosing oneself didn't always come with applause. When I returned inside, I finally opened the bottom drawer of the old sideboard in the hallway, the one where I kept the memory envelopes. I laid out each of Victor's letters one by one. Some still sealed, others folded and refolded until the paper had softened like cloth. I didn't read them. I simply gathered them all and slid them into an empty shoebox. I taped the lid shut. Then, without hesitation, I walked it out to the curb and placed it inside the trash bin. It wasn't anger, it wasn't vengeance, it was release. I came back inside and washed my hands slowly at the sink. The scent of lavender soap filled the air. That night, I took the framed photo of Victor at 8, the one with the paper trophy, and placed it in the drawer of my nightstand. Not to hide it, but to make space on the shelf for something else. I set a new photo in its place, Mila and her brother at the college library, beaming, a symbol not of what I had lost, but of what I had rebuilt. When I finally went to bed, I turned off the lights and lay in the dark, hand resting on my chest. I felt calm, whole. Not because everything had gone the way I planned, but because I had chosen, finally, to walk toward my own peace. The next morning, I opened my email and read through several new messages from women who attended the workshop. One wrote, "You gave me the courage to say no to someone who's been taking from me for years." Another simply said, "I didn't know I could be enough by myself." I replied to each one personally, because that's what we owe one another. Not just stories, but solidarity. Not just survival, but permission to thrive. As the sun rose higher, I packed a picnic lunch and headed to the park near the river. I sat under a tree with a book, watching families fly kites and children run barefoot through the grass. Life was happening all around me. Beautiful, simple, ordinary life. And I was in it, not watching from the sidelines, not waiting to be welcomed, but living fully. If you've ever poured yourself into someone who turned away, if you've ever been forgotten by the very people you built your life around, I hope you hear this and know you are not invisible, you are not disposable, you are not wrong for choosing yourself. Sometimes the deepest act of love is letting go, not because they don't matter, but because you do. I'm Eleanor Grayson, and I finally remembered what it feels like to belong to myself. If my story reminded you of your own, I hope you'll share it with me. I'll be reading every one.